Greetings and salutations, nerds. This is Praying for Superpowers,
a podcast about the deeper meanings, messages, and intricacies hidden within nerd culture. I'm Peter Jordan.
And I'm Trevor Sharon, and today we're joining you from Starfest 2019 in Denver. Hopefully you can hear us. And today we're talking about the Lord Ruler.
So, the Lord Ruler, character from the popular book series Mistborn, although he's not a popular character.
No, but I think he's super cool, and I think there's a lot of reasons that we're seeing him differently than we probably would had things changed.
Right.
I'm just going to skip to my thought, because
I'm ready.
Here's the thought that I had. So, we see in the Well of Ascension.
Yeah.
That Vin has the opportunity to essentially become the next Lord Ruler, right?
Yes.
If we look at Vin's story, how much of her story would be similar to the Lord Ruler's in hindsight 1,000 years later? You know, because she kills a bunch of people. She ruins the world, essentially. She would have.
She ruins the world.
Ruins the world. And I think so my thought is, and I think Sanderson's even talked about this, how the Lord Ruler was actually really well-intentioned.
Yeah, it's in the book. So Sazed's quote is, after all, Rashek was a good man, if his actions did not show that. So
right.
That's a paraphrase, but basically Sazed says he was a good person. Just the way he went about trying to do what he was doing was wrong, which is kind of crazy. And I think the same thing would have happened to Vin. She was, obviously she gave up the power, showing she was inherently a good person as well, because she thought she was doing what was right.
Yeah.
I look at Rashek as being the kind of guy who's giving up almost selfishly, like kind of like the end justifies the means.
Oh, totally.
He would have gladly killed Alendi and not gotten the power at the Well of Ascension, but killing Alendi was a great bonus that he needed to accomplish in order to achieve that power, whereas Vin tries to avoid killing people before getting the power. So, yeah. But I agree. I think Vin's story might have played out very similar. Abused, looked down on, painful history, all that would have kind of led to the same, 1,000 years later, how different would it have been?
Right. And if we look at Vin and her drive to survive.
Yeah.
I think we see that in the Lord Ruler too, where he thinks, okay, I know that I wield the power and I have control over this situation.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to give that up to somebody else to let them destroy everything. Right. Because he's actively, through the canning process, he's actively trying to care for the people in the world and bring survival for the world.
Right, as the books go on, yeah. So the food storage that he leaves under all the cities, the maps, he's not arrogant enough to not set in place plans should he fall, which shows more giving, more heart than he's portrayed as when he's called the Lord Ruler in the whole first book.
Yeah, and I think that had Vin had the same powers as the Lord Ruler, she probably would have held on to her position in a much more fierce way than the Lord Ruler did.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. To me, kind of what it boils down to is, what is your driving force? Vin's was the world is wrong and it should be better than this. It should be brighter. And so her motivations are ultimately good while being underlined with good intention. While Rashek's intentions are ultimately good, underlined with pride and arrogance and hatred.
Yeah.
And so I think Vin, honestly, if she had become the Lord Ruler, her own Lord Ruler, I think she would have outlasted the Lord Ruler for a reign.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
absolutely.
For those of you that,
spoiler alert.
So what I have read, and I haven't looked it up completely, is that because of how the powers that we all know based on the Wax and Wane books, the way that fits into the ferrochemical wheel, so the allomantic wheel, the ferrochemical wheel, and the hemalurgical wheel, those three have been filled by fans because he's so specific on what every metal does that the rest of it is easy enough for him to, like, Brandon wrote the magic system so well that you can figure out what the rest of it does, with a few maybes here and there.
Well, and that's the benefit of having such a hard magic system.
Right. Which I love. I've heard people call it overcomplicated, and like Harry Potter is so not complicated. Like it has no rules, and then Brandon Sanderson has too many rules. I would pick Brandon over Rowling every time when it comes to magic systems. So.
Especially because, so I have an Android phone, and I can teach Bixby, the AI, different things to do according to different phrases that I say. And so I set it up with all of the spells from Harry Potter that I knew. But even when I was looking them up, there were only maybe 20 or so
there's not that many spells in the books. Pottermore has more, but even then it's not many.
And those are really unofficial.
And Brandon Sanderson has 16 medals that have a different use in each of the 3 wheels of Scadrial magic. What I'm most excited about because I think the Lord Ruler, who we know from Mistborn Secret Trilogy, he is passed on. Kelsier being called the Lord Ruler by the tribe from the south, and that him using that name, I think he is attempting to become the next Lord Ruler, not out of pride, which Kelsier is prideful, but out of a desire, because I think he sees some of what Sazed is doing as wrong. And he's seeing that, because Sazed has given everything, Harmony has given everything that they need in the valley, whereas Kelsier has given them nothing that they need. He's helped them figure out a little bit of magic system, and they can fly already. They can fly. They're so far advanced above Elendel and the Basin because they've had to work for what they have.
They've had to develop through grit rather than having things given to them.
Right, and Harmony even addresses that. He says, sometimes I think I've made it too easy. You should have invented the radio 30 years ago, and you're behind schedule because I made it too easy.
Which is really interesting when we compare it to how we are developing as human beings in present day. There are recent studies coming out all the time that are talking about the later development of adults, and how when I was in high school, everybody said that your frontal lobe, the part of your brain that develops last and is in control of kind of higher reasoning, do I want this 5 minutes from now, or do I just want it now? That didn't develop until you were 21. And so of course I can't catch up, because every time I turned 21 and they said 24. I turned 24 and they said 26. I'm 26 now, but I'm waiting for them to say 28
or 31
or 31. But what's happening is that through a lot of snowplow parenting, which is where you eliminate every kind of resistance and obstacle,
and then helicopter parenting, where you're there to get your kids out of any trouble they get into.
What it does is it removes the opportunity to build grit. And I think Sazed has done that too. And he's done it out of this love for the people.
Which is so interesting to me, because he was there for Vin's rise. He was there to see her become the Ascendant Warrior. And he knew she had to go through all this trial. Kelsier had to go through all this trial. All of the half-breed Ska nobility had to go through all this trial. And yet he made Elendel and the Basin flourish, giving them this huge blessing, which honestly sounds really nice, but it kind of boils down to his conversation with Waxillium at the end of Bands of Mourning, where he says, "Where were you?" Waxillium is like, "What are you doing? Where are you? Why aren't you helping?" And Harmony says, "Should I stop every fire that starts in a tenement?" And Waxillium says, "Of course." And he says, "Okay, should I stop every person who's falling down a staircase and will end up dead because of that?" And Waxillium starts to feel a little like, well, maybe not. And he's like, what about splinters and street fights? And he makes it like, I'm trying the best I can to balance this. What's so interesting is in the Sanderson universe, he is only harmony.
Right.
It's the only thing he knows how to do. So he's helping them live in harmony, but he can't figure out autonomy he can't figure out the rest of the aspects of God. So he only has his limited experience as a human and then his godship.
Well, and it's interesting too to see how, in a lot of ways, Rashek, the Lord Ruler, and Sazed have very similar goals of finding balance. We see the balance between the Ska and the Nobleborn. We see a desire to make sure that there is a balance in the power system so that somebody with Furakemi can't use allomancy either, or at the same time.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can, like...
Well, through the inbreeding process.
Right.
So he stops that primarily to bring balance to power. Because it may not be a balance that we would see and say like, oh yeah, that's the healthiest balance. But to the Lord Ruler, he saw that as the most fitting level of balance for what he saw coming and what he was planning for. And since he was very deific, that kind of ends up being the final say.
Yeah.
The same way with Sazed.
Yeah. I keep going back and I keep thinking about the magic systems. The power levels are so much greater in the Mistborn original trilogy, and there's so much less because Harmony has made it less. And then they have firearms and they have cars and stuff. Because he, I believe, was trying to bring balance, even though it brought ruin because it can kill weapons. He wanted to bring balance for those who aren't born with abilities. He wanted to give them a chance. To me, it speaks, and I know you don't know this, but to me, it speaks like the Legend of Korra, where there's the Equalists, Amon, and the Avatar, where he's like training people to be chai tea.
Train them to be chai tea.
Chai tea. To be Tai Li warriors with, weapons that help them. And everyone's like, that's wrong. Like, what? Why would you allow that? And it's like, well, to make it an even playing field. And that's what Sazed is trying to do. All while trying to keep Trell, the 1,000-odd guy, at bay, which is another dark aspect of, or not a dark aspect, but a harsh aspect of God that we haven't met yet.
Which I'm really excited to find out more about. There's a phrase that I'm totally stealing from all of my professors, and I love it because it's so true. And it's just that all behavior makes sense in its context.
Yeah, if someone passed you on the interstate and cut you off, you had to swerve and brake, and then you find out through whatever means that person had been shot and was driving to the hospital with their wife in the back seat who was going into labor, you would probably excuse it. Hey, and this is a personal thing. That's how I treat everyone that treats me bad on the road, because it helps me not care. Because all behavior makes sense in its context.
And so for the Lord Ruler, everything that he did really makes sense once we learn more about him. At the beginning of the first book, we're like, oh, the Lord Evil. He's the Lord Evil.
The Lord Evil. He is the Lord Evil.
But we think of him as this awful person with no redeemable characteristics who just murders all the time without any reason. And then as we learn more about who Rashek was and who the Lord Ruler has become, we start to have a little bit more of it, not as sympathy necessarily.
Or a compassion, but an understanding.
Yeah.
I would say it's interesting because I do come to understand him a bit more. And the problem that I see in him is rage. Because he's never been to Helenium, and he doesn't know the Heleni people that have kind of subjugated unofficially the Terrace people, but he hates them nonetheless. He's never traveled. And there's a saying that is, travel is the cure for racism. So what do you do when a completely racist, uneducated, superpowered human becomes God? You get this rage-filled God who his answer to everything is the harsh first thing in his mind, instead of what we see with Sazed, which is the thought out. Even if I'm being, it's kind of like Sazed errs on the side of giving too much, and the Lord Ruler erred on the side of not giving enough. So that, I think, for both Sazed and the Lord Ruler, you can look and be like, because of the context, what the Lord Ruler was doing makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
He was trying to do his best. He was trying to save the planet. That was his goal. And it actually worked for 998 years.
Right, a long time.
Yeah.
Where it wasn't perfect. Either way, Lord Ruler or Sazed, but it makes sense. And ultimately, if you look at their goals and what brought them to those goals, it makes sense.
Yeah, so Machiavelli, a little bit, and justifies the means for the Lord Ruler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you go out and you can kind of see things from a different perspective and tell us a character that you know of where once you found out a little bit more of the context, their behavior started to make sense.
Yes.
We'll catch you.
I want to hear that. Yeah, please comment.
We'll catch you
next time.